Hello, this is Maureen presenting her action research poster. For those of you who might be listening to this who are not taking the course, we used mock data that was generated by ChatGPT for our action research study. I would have loved to have used real data, but I understand how significantly more time that would have required. I will be speaking about this poster and the paper based on the mock data that I used. The topic of my paper came together excuse me, while I was in a lot of transition, finishing up my work as a resource teacher at a school in the Greater Vancouver area of Canada. I will no longer be working in schools going forward. We also finished school at the end of June here in Canada. I was also working as a private Orton Gillingham tutor, and this is something that I hope to grow into a full time business. I was finishing up with a group of third grade students at the school while also tutoring a student in the community who is going into third grade in the fall. And this is how I landed on third grade for my study. But I would choose fourth grade or older if I were to do this again because I really wanted to look at the impact of explicit syllabication instruction on older students, and fourth grade and above falls more clearly into that older grades category, especially in America. That being said, here in Canada, Tier 1, explicit Tier 1 phonics instruction ends in grade 2, and third grade is the beginning of intermediate for us at our school, or the school that I just left. Anyway, to make it more clear, I would still choose fourth grade and above if there was a next time. I generated my mock data to reflect some progress, some gains overall, except for two students whose data showed very little progress in the pre and post decoding and encoding assessments. Sorry if you can hear that background noise. It's really hot here and my window is open. So, as I was saying, I generated my mock data to reflect some progress and gains overall, except for two students whose data showed very little progress in the pre and post decoding and encoding assessments. I made sure that they did show some very small progress in the weekly progress monitoring. And the difference here is because the workload for progress monitoring is significantly less than in the pre and post assessment, especially how I set it up. This is in terms of how much had to be read and how also the words are presented. So the pre and post assessments were connected text, whereas the progress monitoring was a list of words. I find that most of my students who I tutor are much better able to read a list of words accurately than they are to read connected text. I modeled one of these low performing study students after a real student that I currently tutor, who I need to adapt my instruction for. He is engaged when we use colored markers and when he gets a chance to draw an illustration to go with his writing. Around the time that I was writing the reflection and action plan for this study, a parent who is a family friend of this student that I just mentioned reached out to me about her 8-year-old son. He has ADHD, dyslexia, and dyscalculia. He finds paper and pencil taxing, and he needs creative strategies to stay engaged. It was timely for me to consider what kind of engaging activities and strategies I could come up with for him. It also made me consider all of the students that I tutor because they all seem to present with ADHD along with dyslexia, and they experience cognitive fatigue and overload when they're reading and writing. Student engagement was the unplanned takeaway that came out of this study. Even though it was based on mock data, the reflection process was genuine for me because it got me to consider my practice with my real students. In my paper, I wrote that I would want to do action research on a new question going forward, and this question is: how does the use of regular, explicit, systematic games, kinesthetic activities, and visually enhanced activities in syllabication intervention affect 8 third grade students over 4 weeks? I would use all of the same methodology that I used in this study and then compare the results. I would keep it at third grade so that the comparison would be more clear. I think the findings of this study would be beneficial for the training staff and leadership at a place called Reach Richmond here in the Greater Vancouver area, where I received my Orton Gillingham training from 2019 and 2021. The emphasis at the time was on methods that were tried and true based in the science of reading. What was not explicitly discussed was student engagement, cognitive fatigue, and overload, and how integral student engagement is to intervention for students who present with characteristics of dyslexia. I would be surprised, however, if the staff at REACH haven't come to this conclusion themselves. A lot shifted in education after COVID, as well as what has also shifted with technology in terms of neuroscience and the depth and breadth of research and data that we are receiving from neuroscience about how best to teach students with dyslexia.